Salamis. It was the capital of Cyprus and one of the greatest cities in the region for centuries. Nowadays, all we can see is ruins. Only the smaller part of the city is visible to the public. Large part of the ruins remains unexcavated. The great harbour that made the city so important back in the ancient times now rests underwater due to the rise of the sea level, and only a few fragments of walls can be seen on the seashore. The ancient city of Salamis became the capital of Cyprus as far back as 1100 BC. The city shared the destiny of the rest of the island during the successive occupations by the various dominant powers of the Near East: Assyrians, Egyptians, Persians and Romans. The ancient site covers an area of 1 square mile, extending along the seashore. There is still a large area awaiting excavation, and this is forested with mimosa pine and eucalyptus trees. Most of the remains of buildings that we see today have been excavated and partially reconstructed after the 1950s and 60s, when the pro-Greek government sponsored the research and conservation projects in an attempt to prove the Greek presence on the island having deep historical roots. Despite that, most of what's been uncovered belongs to Roman and late Roman periods. The theatre, with 50 rows of seats and a seating capacity of 15,000, is probably the most spectacular sight, and it is one of the most popular tourist attractions. The theatre is so well restored that it looks like a modern building. When it was discovered in 1959, the Antiquities Department decided to make the restoration so complete that it could be used for plays and concert performances for modern Cypriot audiences. This is good for indoctrinating the masses of people with the rituals of ancient culture, but rather detracts from the antique atmosphere of the ruins of Salamis. A severe earthquake destroyed the city in 76 AD, after which the gymnasium with its colonnaded palaestra was built by Trajan and Hadrian. This is the most monumental part of the site, but columns differ in size, because after the second great earthquake of 331 AD, the Christians set up new columns, which they dragged from the Roman theatre. After the site was reconstructed in 1955 and columns were re-erected, the gymnasium became one of the most popular tourist attractions in Cyprus. Inside gymnasium, visitors can observe several statues of Roman gods and goddesses. All of them are missing heads. It may be, as some authors suggest, that the early Christians were intolerant of the pagan ideas of Roman gods and goddesses and took the heads off. However, a more logical explanation is to be found in the Renaissance period in European history. About the 16th century, it became fashionable for people to revive the culture of ancient Greece and Rome. People liked to have some marble object of antiquity perched on a pedestal in their hall or garden. It was very easy to lop off the head of marble statue from all these ancient ruins, easy to carry away, and above all, no one stopped you. It was not regarded as looting. Some of the marble heads from Salamis and other places are to be seen in the Nicosia Museum. Good sculpture in marble and granite that was used to build columns and statues cannot be found in Cyprus, so it had to be imported from Turkey, Greece and Italy. Romans had almost an obsession about baths and running water, which to them was the lifeblood of the town. So it should be in dry Mediterranean climates. They used running water for an excellent system of sanitation, far superior to what we see in many villages today. There are a lot of visible remains of the ancient water supply system that consisted of pipes, wells and aqueducts. In domestic engineering, the ancient Romans were almost up to our modern standards, especially in central heating. Most of the buildings had heated floors. A perfect example of these is the West Hall building, where visitors can see a large air space that has been exposed below the floor, which is supported by the pillars of terracotta tiles. This is the hypocaust and is connected by the air ducts to the furnaces in the outer buildings. This system required a very large number of slaves, not only to stoke up the furnaces day and night, but to forage around the countryside collecting wood and olives. The Massaria plain in the middle of Cyprus was well forested in ancient times, and it was not until the late Middle Ages that timber became scarce in Cyprus. After the massive deforestation, the climate changed dramatically. What once was the green forest became the steppe full of sand dunes. The river that flowed through Salamis disappeared completely. The ancient riverbed is now filled with sand. Nearby, located the market street in Agora. Salamis was a great commercial center of Cyprus, centralized in this huge market. Nearby was the port of Salamis, bringing in goods from Italy, Turkey, Greece and the Middle East. A good deal of foodstuffs were obtained from the surrounding countryside, where the local people could pay their taxes in the form of farm produce. The late Roman period after 400 AD up to about 1100 AD is known as the Byzantine epoch, when the first great Christian churches called basilicas were built. The visitors should see St. Epiphanes and Campanopetra, for they are the largest churches in Cyprus. Basilica Campanopetra is the only church in Salamis that has part of the wall still standing. The fragment of the wall with windows can be seen from far away. Sarcophaguses carved out of marble that saints were buried in are still inside. On the floor of one of the buildings, visitors can find amazingly well-preserved mosaics. Despite being gradually destroyed by tourists who take the pieces as souvenirs, the pattern on it is still visible. At about 674 AD, Arab invasion brought about the destruction of the entire city, and the inhabitants fled south to build the medieval town of Famagusta. There must have been a great change in the climate, as the city was overwhelmed with sand, and only the tops of the columns peeped above. Coins of the Middle Ages Licinian period were found around the basilicas, from which one can conclude that squatters lived in the ruins perhaps up to about 1300 AD. For the next 600 years, the ancient site was looted and regarded as quarry for building. During the Venetian occupation of Famagusta, many columns and pieces of sculpture were dragged from the site. The constant looting was not halted until 1952 AD, when organized excavation by the Department of Antiquities began. Due to the military conflict in 1974, Cyprus was divided and all of the excavations and research in Salamis were stopped. Since then, almost nothing had been done to preserve the site. The erosion from the salty sea wind is destroying the limestone blocks. Even the marble columns and statues are getting eroded away. After 2000 years of exposure to wind, rain and sun, the rocks get dissolved away. This is due to the rainwater line on the surface of the rock being made acid by the action of microscopic organisms. The lack of surveillance and protection are making things much worse. On my first visit to Salamis, both statues in the Roman theatre were intact. When I returned a few days later, one of the statues got completely destroyed. Someone pushed the statue off its pedestal. With the amount of tourists that visit the site every day, it is only the matter of time before we lose another one of those ancient works of art. Many tourists take away colored pieces of mosaics or marble. Without proper protective measures, everyone can vandalize and loot here. The most fascinating outdoor museum in Cyprus is getting demolished piece by piece. Maybe it is for the best that there are no excavations going in Salamis, because without proper financing and protective measures, it is very hard to preserve what has been dug out and exposed to the elements and people.